Angelo Little Angie Tuminaro was born on February 22, 1910, and raised in Manhattan. He resided and operated on the Lower East Side for nearly his entire life. For many years, he lived at 24 Rutgers Street and frequented the area around the Pike Street docks and Madison Street in the Old Fourth Ward section, an area that produced many a mafiosi in its day. He had a brother named Frank who was also connected with the mob. They were close and operated together for years until Frank was later murdered. Tuminaro was a notorious hoodlum and gunman with a lengthy and serious criminal record dating to 1929 for such charges as robbery, assault, grand larceny, weapons offenses, parole violations, and repeated vagrancy charges. Later, both the NYPD Organized Crime Intelligence Task Force as well as the FBI listed him as a made member of the Lucchese family based in East Harlem. Some of his closer associates included Rosario Cerro Mogavero, Alfred L. Walker Emberado, Pasquale Patsy Fuca, Cosmo Carly DiPietro, Frank Frankie T. Mary, Anthony Tony Mira, and Frank Angie, among others. In 1953, at the age of 43, he got married to a Jewish girl named Bella Stein, whose father was also a hood in their area. In later years, Little Angie became the paramour of Lower East Side hoodlum Danny Motto's daughter, with Danny's blessings, of course. Danny Motto was a former pro boxer who later became president of the Bakery and Confectionery Workers Union and a major labor leader in the New York area. He also doubled as a Lucchese associate and Shylock, serving directly under Capo Tony Dux Corallo. With the appropriate nickname of Little Angie, Tuminaro stood a tiny 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed in at a mere 130 pounds. But this jockey-sized mafioso had a giant reputation for deadly ferocity and a wanton viciousness that belied his appearance. He was highly suspected of performing many contract killings over the years for the Mafia and for his own personal reasons. In fact, the NYPD actively investigated him for years and several unsolved gangland murders he was suspected of having committed. Little Angie held a partnership interest in the Apollo Barbershop at 144 Clinton Street that doubled as his unofficial headquarters. He operated from there with his boyhood partner, Anthony Bootsy DePasqua, engaging in Shylocking numbers and a major wholesale narcotics trade that supplied several top Jewish traffickers through his father-in-law. Tuminaro had a variety of narcotics sources, but chief among his main suppliers were the Catroni brothers' regime in Montreal, Canada, and later Vito Genovese's European narcotics pipeline. Little Angie was suspected of first dabbling in the narcotics trade by the mid-1940s, coinciding with the end of World War II and his release from a stint in state prison. Angie was broke and needed quick bucks, so he dove headfirst into the powder trade. In 1958, several informants in Lower Manhattan told their FBI handlers that Tuminaro and Bootsy DePasqua had put their drug profits to work by going into the Shylock business. They allegedly also provided at least $10,000 to fellow soldier Joseph Joe Bumpy Fernandez to augment his loan shark business. They became limited partners in that operation. Besides narcotics and Shylocking, Tuminaro was also known to be active in burglaries, truck hijackings, fencing stolen goods, and strong-arm extortion. A good example of this criminal diversity was the October 1955 burglary of the popular Eversharp Pen Company warehouse in Chicago, which was robbed of a shipment of pens valued at $300,000. Within a month, FBI informants in New York City advised their handlers that a substantial portion of the stolen merchandise was being fenced in the Big Apple. The informant named Tuminaro and a partner named Tommy Otto as the two key distributors, and he named Little Angie as having sole control over the entire New York portion of the load, said to number some 120,000 pens. The informant later learned that Tuminaro and Otto went to Philadelphia in March of 1956, where Angie arranged to sell a part or all of the stolen load to a well-known hoodlum and labor racketeer named Samuel Shorty Feldman. Aside from his other endeavors, Tuminaro allegedly also controlled a lucrative Greek rummy game in downtown Manhattan along 2nd Avenue and 12th Street. This card game was actually operated by a partner of his named Buster, who ran the weekly game from a downstairs apartment in the building. From at least the early 1950s forward, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics knew that Tuminaro and his close associates were people to be watched carefully, confident that they were knee-deep into the heroin trade. But it wasn't until 1962 that they successfully cracked his network. A combined team of 50 federal agents and city police staged lightning-quick raids against his entire web. This is a case that infamously became known as the French Connection, and the arrests made front-page headlines across the country and Europe. His two nephews, ex-convict Pasquale Patsy Fuca and his longshoreman brother Anthony Tony Fuca, were arrested as key players in the massive heroin importation and trafficking conspiracy. That raid took place at their father Joseph's home in Brooklyn, who was also arrested along with Patsy's wife Barbara. Inside the home, agents found 22 one-pound packages of heroin prepped and ready for distribution, hidden inside a fresh, newly plastered ceiling in the basement. At the same time, other premises were also being searched for contraband, including Patsy and Barbara Fuca's Bensonhurst, Brooklyn apartment and the luncheonette they ran in downtown Manhattan along Pike Slip. Law enforcement uncovered not only dope, but also scales, glassine bags, and packaging equipment, several pistols, rifles, and shotguns, and a Japanese submachine gun with full clips. But it wasn't until a day later that agents really hit pay dirt. During questioning after her arrest, Barbara Fuca, who didn't actually admit doing this until years later, told authorities about a huge second stash of product at her brother-in-law's home. And when agents finally searched Anthony Fuca's Bronx apartment, they found 88 pounds of pure high-grade white heroin. It was valued at $25 million. As far as the French connection, the key Frenchman entrusted by the Corsican mob in Marseille to initially smuggle the drug shipment in from France was Jacques Angelo, a popular television personality back in Paris. He played a prominent role in the international conspiracy, even though he later tried to play innocent. The dope was hidden in his car's door frames and chassis and then loaded onto a luxury liner bound for the United States. Once the ship arrived and docked at New York's West Side piers, Angelo retrieved his car and drove off, not a care in the world. But unfortunately for him, drug agents had been monitoring him the whole time, as well as the Fucas and several other suspects later identified as top members of the French underworld. Authorities were patiently waiting for the right moment to move in and make the arrest, and when that moment came, Angelo and the others were taken down. Angelo pleaded innocent, but he was still held on $100,000 bail. Also arrested was a top racketeer in the Marseille underworld and a Paris bistro owner named Francois Scaglia, a.k.a. Barbier. He had been involved in several key meetings to negotiate prices and logistics for moving the massive narcotics shipment. But unfortunately for him, he was still in Manhattan when things went down and was charged with conspiracy and possession of heroin. After a high-profile criminal trial, Patsy Fuca and company were all convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. But Patsy stood up like a man, took the full weight, and never opened his yap on anybody, including his dear Uncle Angie. Tuminaro himself figured into an earlier related narcotics case in 1960 when he was indicted in May of that year in New York along with 13 other top hoods on heroin trafficking and conspiracy charges. Released on a bail package of $35,000, prosecutors and the case judge quickly set a trial date for that November, but just as quickly, little Angie jumped his bail and disappeared into thin air. He was on the lam for over 2 years until his capture down in Miami, Florida on November 6, 1962. This was an intensive combined manhunt by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, the FBI, the Federal Marshals Service, and local law enforcement, with authorities also using many informant tips to track their man. Knowing Tuminaro was an avid gambler, he was finally arrested at a local dog track one night in Miami by local detectives and federal narcotics agents. He was held on a whopping $300,000 bail before a federal magistrate, and after waiving extradition before the Florida court, little Angie was transported back up to Manhattan to face the federal music. He was supposed to have stood trial with the notorious Lucchese capo Big John Armento and 12 others for a multi-million-dollar heroin smuggling network that they had all been convicted of months earlier in June. Armento, as the acknowledged leader of the drug ring, received a 40-year jail term. This case was interrelated with several other cases that also snagged Vito Genovese, Carmine Galante, and other top mafiosi. Tuminaro had been one of many recognized as top cogs in these drug operations. Despite all little Angie's trouble with the feds, he and his brother and their friends continued trafficking almost unimpeded. A few years later, in 1968, little Angie's brother Frank and his partner Frank Angie were found shot to death and wrapped in bags along the side of a desolate road in the town of Bloomingburg in upstate New York. Shortly thereafter, veteran Genovese member Charles Chiles Gagliododo was found dead on a Queens street. The medical examiner initially ruled his death a heart attack, but investigators soon got word from their informants that Gagliododo had been suffocated with a plastic bag that had been placed over his head. It seems that crazy old Chiles had plotted the double murder of Tuminaro and Angie over a narcotics deal gone sour. He was suspected of having committed these gangland murders without the sanction of higher-ups, thereby incurring the wrath of the Mafia hierarchy. Little Angie had demanded Gagliododo's head for killing his brother Frank, and he got it. After the FBI exhumed the body, the ME determined that, in fact, Gagliododo had died from manual strangulation. These types of murders and the resultant vendetta killing were sensitive stuff in the Mafia. It involved the Genovese and Lucchese families and could have ended up with a gang war had the Genovese mob not given satisfaction to their Lucchese friends by killing one of their own to satisfy the debt. As a side note, Charles Gagliododo had indeed been a bit of a screwball and loose cannon, and everybody in the New York mob knew it. In his day, he had been a stone killer, an actual contract killer, who was known to have traveled around the country committing hits for the hierarchy with his partner David Little Davy Batillo, another half a nut job. The two of them were also known to bang the gong occasionally, an old-time mob phrase for smoking opium. Underworld legend has it that they would team up and dress in drag as a way to disguise themselves to get close enough to their future murder victim in order to kill him. Never one to learn his lesson or be rehabilitated, by the 1970s, little Angie was back at it again. In a complete replay of an earlier time, he had been indicted for narcotics dealing and once again took it on the hop, disappearing into the night to avoid prosecution. He was once again a fugitive from justice. He went on the lam, and the feds are going crazy searching for him, with wanted bulletins splashed across the country. By 1978, a key informant was being developed on Long Island by the name of Michael Orlando. He had been a former school teacher who was now deeply involved in Italian organized crime. A very unlikely top mob informant, but federal authorities had proven his worth with information he provided them in regard to several important investigations, including the case of Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan and Bronx-based Genovese mobsters, several truck hijackings, the planned murder of Carmine Galante, and efforts to restart the French Connection heroin network. Incredulous, but true. In mid-1978, he told his newly assigned federal handler of a planned meeting down in Coral Springs, Florida by top mobsters to specifically discuss a French Connection revival. Already deep into an investigation which the feds had dubbed ToomCon for Tuminaro conspiracy, Orlando and Genovese soldier Billy the Butcher Maselli had been directed by fellow mobsters to go to the parking lot of an area church for the meeting. While they waited in their car, a small, gnarled old lady in black walked out of the church and approached them. It was actually Tuminaro in disguise. Authorities later said that even though they were aware of the meeting with the fugitive they desperately wanted, they chose not to make any move to close in on them, sacrificing Tuminaro's arrest in order to protect Orlando's informant status. Little Angie was allowed to evaporate into thin air once more, and it appears this was the last time he was ever seen again. He was 77 years old at the time and still trying his best to rock and roll on the streets. How much longer he operated or even lived after that is anybody's guess, but what we do know is that the name Angelo Tuminaro is one gangland will not soon forget. Thank you for watching. Until next time.